Welcome to the Open Door. Jim Hanink here with fellow panelists Mario Ramos-Reyes and Christopher Zehnder. Today, we return to a theme central to Christian life, evangelization. Our special and welcome guest is Jessica Murdoch, Ph.D. She is an associate professor of systematic Constructive Theology at Villanova University. Murdoch is a wife and a mother who is active in parish ministry. We begin, as always, in prayer. Come, O Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and enkindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. O God, who has taught the hearts of the faithful by the light of the Holy Spirit, grant that by the gift of the same Spirit, we may be always truly wise and ever rejoice in his consolation. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. Professor Murdoch, Jessica, if I may, could you tell us a bit about yourself and your family?
Well, I am an associate professor at Villanova University. It's actually in fundamental and dogmatic theology are my specialties. I'm married to Jim Murdoch, who is a fellow Maritime Society philosopher.
Maritanistas. We call them Maritanistas.
Maritanistas. So, Jim's a philosopher. And we have 5 children whom we homeschool, ages 3 to 11. So they're fun. 4 boys, 1 girl. My daughter's birthday is today. She turned 10.
Oh.
So, we homeschool them. We say we have a classically STEM-based homeschool, which probably makes sense to no one except us. But it makes a lot of sense. My background is my bachelor's degree is actually in chemistry. So I tend to be sciencey. And Jim tends to be very historical. So it's a great combination for homeschool. So that's us. We live in, the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, which is a wonderful diocese to pray and work in.
Very good. And just a short time ago, there was a Red Rose Rescue in Philadelphia. But that's another matter, and that's the matter especially of another guest of ours, Monica Migliorino-Miller. Well, Mario, do you want to continue this line of inquiry?
Well, good morning, Professor. I would like to know what were your initial steps in becoming an academic theologian?
Okay, that was a circuitous path. I actually intended to become a nun and not a theologian, but I got kicked out of the Carmelites. True story.
Fuera!
I tried to join the Carmelites. I love St. Therese. I love St. Teresa of Avila. I love St. John of the Cross. However, it turns out I'm really, really extroverted. And so I thought, this is great, the contemplative life. Until Mother Barbara, who was the Mother Superior at the time, came to me and said, we don't think this is your vocation. And of course, I'm like a late teen. I'm like, why? Sister, why? And she's like, you talk too much. So that was kind of like my aspiration to be a Carmelite. So then I tried, I am persistent. I did try another order. I spent some time with the Sisters of St. Joseph. But it turned out God was calling me to be a theologian and not a nun. Who knew? Because in college, I didn't know what a theologian was. So as I said before, my undergraduate degree is actually in chemistry. I kind of have a great passion for science and theology, which is why I'm a Thomist, of course. But so I sort of
snuck that one by. You snuck that one by. Go ahead.
But I realized that I didn't really want to spend my time in a lab because, again, I'm an extrovert, and I didn't want to just, that just didn't fit my sort of personality. So I ended up going to graduate school in a lark in theology, at the now defunct Washington Theological Union. And from there, I went up to Fordham. So that's really how this happened.
Now, Christopher, as we continue to fill out this background, Jessica's already mentioned Villanova. She got her degree from Fordham. But what she would really like to tell us about, and this is a late ad, Notre Dame's program in liberal arts. So, Christopher, you actually live fairly close to Notre Dame, or as close as anybody would want to live to Notre Dame. I'll ask you to ask Jessica about Notre Dame and the great Midwest.
Okay, Jessica, tell me about Notre Dame and the great Midwest.
He's already ready to jump in. That's why we love him. That's why we love him.
Are you at Notre Dame?
No, I live in Ohio.
Oh, okay.
Which some people claim is not the Midwest. A lot of Midwesterners say Ohio is not the Midwest, but Ohio says it is the Midwest. In fact, we have Bob's Bar we have a place called Bob's Bar in Columbus, which says it's the cultural hub of the Midwest.
Oh, interesting.
And moreover, Jessica, you should know this about Christopher. He is the only current office holder of the American Solidarity Party.
Oh, my husband's told me about this American Solidarity Party.
Well, Christopher is established a beachhead.
Okay, I think my husband's in this party now.
Yes.
Actually, for Jim.
Well, we'll enlist you later, but go ahead.
I'm more straight up monarchist, but my husband's
Charles Coulomb is not with us today.
He's more my speed, but my husband definitely is all American Solidarity Party. Anyway, Notre Dame. While I was completing my dissertation from Fordham, I went out for a fellowship at the University of Notre Dame. And I ended up actually on the faculty of the program of liberal studies for a couple years. And it was a wonderful, wonderful position. Life circumstances sort of made me transfer out of there. But, it was the first time I really came into contact with the so-called great books. John Senior writes a wonderful, that's The Death and the Restoration of Christian Culture. But what he writes in it is that, you might remember he has a list of the good books because the children, he says, has to be inculcated in the good books. It's sort of like the fertile ground so that the seeds of the great books can take. Now, I'm a child of the 80s, so he's definitely describing my childhood, where you just have a whole lot of fluff and none of this really meat, none of the good meat. So for me, it was just wonderful to really enter into the great conversation, from Plato to the brothers Karamazov, and from Aristotle's De Anime to Virginia Woolf. I mean, it's sort of an entire, St. Bonaventure, St. Thomas, St. Francis de Sales. It was a wonderful chance to really immerse myself in the Western tradition. And I really think that it has contributed to the approach I take in theology and to my general sort of theological viewpoint.
Gosh, would you believe that one of the first guests, you're speaking of the great books, one of the first guests on our program was Mortimer Adler.
Oh, wow. I can't believe that.
You believe that? Well, if you believe that, Christopher's got a bridge in Brooklyn that he'll sell you a timeshare in.
I'm like, is he alive? I don't know.
We've actually had someone from the Great Ideas, which is an offshoot of a Mortimer Adler enterprise, join us. Elaine Weissman, very, very wonderful lady. Well, Christopher, since that was just a kind of a frame for a question, would you like to pursue it?
Yeah, so you mentioned that the great books inform your approach to theology. How do they inform your approach to theology?
Well, I think it gives me an insight into human experience. That's like a rich reflection point for theology. So I'm naturally more scientific minded. And even though I'm an extrovert, I'm a very, very succinct extrovert. I think it's why I like the Summa so much. I sort of cut to the chase. I only need 3 lines and let's go. So I'm very comfortable with abstract thought. But most people aren't. And my students primarily are not comfortable with abstract thought. And you need an entire basis of human experience and human discourse, and maybe even like a whole human lexicon to draw from in order to, I think, articulate theology in a meaningful way. And I think that's really what the great books do for me. I can pull from T.S. Eliot. I can pull from Dante. I can pull from Dostoevsky and bring that in dialogue with, the hardcore theology. But it is definitely, it's more accessible, I think, in that form. Does that make sense?
Do you think? Is it merely by way of happy examples that drawn from literature that it contributes, or is it something else?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I think I don't want to say happy examples. I want to say plumbs to the depth of human existentiality. Because it sounds better. No, but seriously, okay, take Brothers Karamazov. I sometimes form an entire course around that. It's the presence and absence of God. And, obviously I do sort of those basic questions of theodicy. But students will stay on a superficial level and tend not, at least college students today, and they tend not to be very self-reflective. And in fact, if you make them self-reflective in a real way, in a non-superficial way, it can be somewhat alienating. So sometimes it's better to probe Dimitri. It's better to probe Ivan. It's better to probe the sort of depths of human existentiality and all of the questions that they have somewhere deep inside that they're almost afraid to unearth through the lens of something a little less close to home, a little non-alienating. And I find it a useful vehicle for that, actually.
Do you think that literature, though, plays a different part than, say, philosophy? Thinking, I think, St. Thomas probably read the Aeneid and drew from it, right? I don't think he read the Brothers Karamazov. but he also read Aristotle. And
I think
it has a different function.
Yeah, it's definitely a different function. I mean, like, it is definitely more descriptive for sure. I mean, the natural, in my view, dialogue partner for theology is certainly philosophy. I mean, philosophy has a certain foundational role to play that literature just doesn't. But I do think art, literature included, plays an important, maybe descriptive role. But it's not a superficial description. It's a depth one. I think it breaks open truth in, I want to say, an intuitive way rather than a thematic way. And I think it gives an entree to my students to then begin the sort of thematic exploration of the truth, which they tend to have a hesitancy towards.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, and also I've often found that philosophers who study literature are more adept at understanding the fine meanings of words, which become absolutely necessary, as you know, with St. Thomas. Yes. So that the shades of meaning are extremely important. I find that's also a benefit from literature. Good.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mariah, please.
I have a question. I don't know if I will formulate well, but going to the concrete, to human experience here and now, we are going through what we may call a democratic crisis, the crisis of the democratic system. And that's across the board. It's in the United States, in Europe, in Latin America, everywhere is the same because of the social media. We are going through the same issues, even though the economic development is differ from one place to another. But this is the issue. There has been a claim which came after Second World War, where Maritain was one of the thinkers about that the democratic system is the way to go, is the most powerful epistemological tool in order to discuss ideas and move further and go deeper into what we may call economic democracy. I don't want to go there. Now, in order to have that democratic system, you need to have citizens well educated in their own rationality, because we are supposed to be discussing this issue rationally. So people must be impartial, people must be objective so that we can discuss and we have a dialogue. Okay? Now we know that that dialogue is almost impossible, because the claim made by one group is incommensurable to another. Mm-hmm. And we run into that crisis that I think, it's my view, McIntyre described very well. We are talking different languages because our terms come from different traditions which are long time gone. So that ideal is completely gone. How do we know that? Well, go and listen to people in Congress or any other places where the language of politicians and even the people is completely fragmented. So everything is reduced to power. Now, that's a grim diagnosis, and I share that. Doesn't mean I don't have a supernatural hope, but nevertheless, my question is, according to what you said, to what extent the great books can help in educating us, young generation, I don't say politicians, in rebuilding this sense of reality that seems to be completely lost from our democratic ethos.
So I agree with your assessment, but I don't think the great books are actually the answer to that problematic. I actually think metaphysics is the answer to that problematic. I mean, I think that churches, I think the classical metaphysical tradition is really the remedy to the analysis that you just put forth. I mean, the fracturing of rationality sort of reaches its peak in the 19th century. And to some extent, the 20th and the 21st century are just the fallout of the masters of suspicion, right? So this is now a long-standing problem. I mean, I think other people have articulated well that we've been sort of operating on the fumes of like, the last bit of Western Civ, and now those fumes are gone. And we find ourselves in like a raw situation where, as you said, Mario, it's just a power grab. It's really scary to me, frankly, how quickly society has descended into a complete totalitarian chaos overnight. You feel like, I mean, I genuinely feel like, and my family feels like, we woke up into a completely different world within the past year and a half. And it's at breakneck pace. So at any rate, I think the remedy actually there is not the great books. I love the great books, and I do think they give a common lexicon. But I feel like the crisis is so critical that I don't think we have time to take that happy method. I think now we simply need to make strong arguments in favor of classical metaphysics, of objective metaphysics, of realist metaphysics. I think that is sort of the fundamental issue. The problem is we're a country of fundamentalists. We're a country of, I mean, first of all, Protestantism is itself grounded in that kind of sentimentality. The Catholic Church often seems to be wanting to mimic that sentimentality, even though it's not actually hers. And American culture itself is grounded in that sort of fundamental, irrational, sentimental position. And as you've already said, two competing claims that have no underlying rationality are simply in an irreducible plurality, and we're going to get nowhere. So I really think a strong defense of metaphysics is really what's in order. So that sort of answers your question and sort of doesn't.
Yes, it does. It does. And it seems to me that I agree with you. The reason of my question is personal, because I'm looking for a way to rebuild this democratic culture. But also it seems to me that one of the claims of Mortimer Adler was precisely the opposite. So the way to rebuild democracy is going back to the great books.
Right.
That is a very difficult proposition, at least to me, because many of these books, depend on the list that you elaborate, are against precisely those foundations. But that's a different issue.
Or even the population we're talking about. I mean, how many people today actually read? I mean, civilization has declined to the point of a tweet. I mean, we don't even form whole sentences anymore. We use emojis. I mean, so to get people who are used to tweeting to sit down and read a book is already such a tremendous thing, and it's completely foreign. And then also the hostility that we currently have in, all of the like critical race theory, or some of our feminist theory, or all of the foment around those issues right now really make the great books kind of a non-starter for a lot of people who do not necessarily share our philosophical and theological commitments. And so I think that's also a problem. I mean, yeah.
May I just jump in here for a minute? If people aren't reading, how do we get them to listen to metaphysical arguments?
Yeah. I give you that. No, I gotta be honest. It's easier to get a college freshman. Now, granted, it's an educated person, but somewhat. But it's easier to get a college freshman to consider the nature of reality than it is to get a college freshman to read a Russian novel. That's just the truth of it. So I think there's something, how they call St. Thomas the common sense doctor. There is something so innately understandable about particularly Thomistic thought and Thomistic metaphysics that I actually find it rather easy to kind of draw my students in, usually against their own will, to the point that by the end of the discussion, they're thinking, well, I kind of agree with that, but yet that fundamentally goes against the relativism that I really want to preserve so that I can do what I want to do. So, I do still think we can have these conversations. Now, you don't, break out terms like act and potency, obviously, from the start. I mean, you do eventually, but not like, from the start. But I think you begin with those basic human experiences of, do you like to be lied to? No. Have you ever told a lie? Of course you have, because this is our fallen nature with original sin. So to what extent is there truth? Are you the ground of that truth? If God's the ground of truth, since he's truth itself, everything is meaningful. If you're the ground of truth, what does that say about meaning? Those sorts of questions. Or you ask them a question about a moral question, and you don't immediately go for the moral questions that are, of course, their own sticking points. You go for something that's truly horrific to them, something like abuse or trafficking or something like that. Do we want to say that this is actually an evil? Okay, on what grounds are you saying that this is evil, since you're a relativist freshman? How can you critique this? But I know innately in my heart that this is, I hate to get all like the fields because I'm not really touchy-feely, but they are. I know on some level that this is fundamentally evil and repugnant to me. Why is that? And so, I think, you could do the same thing with beauty. It's like the Communio guys do. There is a way, I think, to really have this discourse about realist metaphysics in a way that's accessible to most. That's what I would say. Not all, maybe, but most. But the ones for whom it's not accessible to, they have other means. They have the liturgy. Think about St. Thomas's poor widow. So, this is the means for most, but, God has his own means for the others. So it's fine.
That's a very scintillating answer. Scintillating. Now, I hope I can formulate my question half so well as Mario formulated his question. But I want to begin with, since you're science-based, I want to begin with something evidential.
Okay.
A new study has shown that 97% of verbally active Catholics tell lies.
Wait, 97%?
Of verbally active Catholics
What's a
tell
verbal
lies.
Catholic? Like anyone who can speak? And the other 3% are lying about it.
That's a riff on artificial contraception.
I think that 97% with artificial contraception is actually, I think that's too high of a number myself. But anyway, I question that number.
There might not be quite so many liars either. Now, you mentioned a while back that students, I think you even said, get alienated from themselves when they're pushed to really reflect on themselves. And so it's easier to reflect on the subjectivity of character XYZ in a Russian novel. Now, for some reason, that brought to mind a claim that Harry Frankfurt makes in his runaway bestseller on bullshit, which I've used in a number of classes. And one of the things he tries to do is to explain this phenomenon of people saying just any old thing. And then, somewhat paradoxically, he says, when we have this shift from I think to I feel, from the objective order to the subjective order, there's even more of a propensity to bullshit because we have such a tenuous grasp of ourselves. Mm-hmm. All right, framework. Now I'm getting closer to the question. If, in fact, the remedy ultimately is classical metaphysics, then we're looking at, as Karol Wojtyła said, we're looking at a metaphysics that is so ordered to the objective that it's failed to develop the subjective. And so he says, why not a Thomistic personalism as opposed to a Aristotelian metaphysics? Why not acknowledge the errors of Descartes?
Not an error.
And all his creepy crowd.
Okay, there's an error of Descartes. I do not agree with Wojtyła on this point.
Now we come to the core of it. Now we come to the very core of your heterodoxy. We've come to it. Would you like to defend yourself, madam?
You might actually be the only person to have called me heterodox. That's awesome.
Oh, we're alert to every form of heterodoxy.
No, there's obviously a problem with Descartes, but I don't agree with Wojtyła on this point, actually. So, I mean, I'm not saying that there's not a room for Thomistic personalism. But my point of criticism is this: when we understand the classical categories well, then the critique doesn't hold. So again, you're saying that there's an emphasis on the object or the objective, and it excludes somehow an understanding of the person. But the person is at the basis of Thomistic philosophy and theology. Whose person? Boethius's person, an individuated substance of a rational nature. Now, okay, to our ears, maybe not to yours because you guys are trained ears, but to the average person, if you say a person is an individuated substance of a rational nature, sure, that sounds kind of dry, non-experiential. But when you drill into what this actually means, when you recognize that a rational nature is one who has intellect and will, remember this, the entire 19th century critique rides on sort of the affirmation of the will over the intellect. So when you remember that that the rational nature is the same nature, angelic nature, human nature, an intellect and a will that God has perfected, an individuated instantiation of that very person who in their historical concrete actions knows and decides, I don't really see what's left out of Boethius's definition. You've got history, you've got subjectivity, you've got decision. So I don't think the critique holds. I think it's, I think that Wojtyła, I think Thomistic personalism in Wojtyła's sense is somewhat fine, although I do have some issues with Shaler, but whatever. But I think that it's more a matter of language than the core concept. In other words, I don't think Thomas gets anything wrong. So
not only are we rational dependent animals, we have rational appetites.
Intellect, will, okay, but Thomas talks about our concupiscible and irascible appetite.
Yes, exactly. That's my point.
I mean, yeah. But that's my point is, what is left out of Thomas's understanding?
Yes.
What is impersonal about Thomas's understanding? And remember that because of the analogical way that he uses language, the preeminent person, of course, is God. We're only a person derivatively. So when we understand, sorry, Mario, go ahead.
May I react to what you are saying?
Yeah.
What Wojtyła, I think, at one point referred to is that the language, I don't remember he said the language, the way by which the classical metaphysics present looks like it's objectivist because somehow doesn't show the affection, the sense of the heart. Now, we can call that appetite. But in contemporary philosophy or phenomenology, which is his way of looking at things, is the emphasis in the heart. In other words, yes, what all of these claims are true, but then the sense of subjectivity, not subjectivism, it requires from us this affection. It seems to be not in Aquinas, not saying what Aquinas said is wrong. What he's saying that the subjectivity that somehow we inherited, or he claimed we inherited from Descartes, not the subjectivism, but the emphasis on the subject, it seems to be missed from that classical metaphysics.
No,
I'm just, don't
yes,
blame
from Aristotle, but not from Thomas.
Right,
It may be missing from Aristotle, but it's not missing from Thomas.
The argument is very substantialist yet. So this doesn't touch, and you mentioned something in passing, which I think I'm not sure if I understood. You say, well, there is also a sense of history. I don't see how the sense of history is in Aquinas yet. Okay. The sense of history began to be really known in 19th century, late 19th century.
Where is the locus of human decision, Mario? Where is the locus of human decision? Where is it that we're acting? Where is it that we're employing our free will in order to reach our final end in God? Here, in temporality, in history. This is the place of our decision. I mean, Thomas is very, very clear about that. So a rational nature is precisely the one that's operative in historical concrete realities. Okay, does he use the line historical concrete realities? No, because I'm a 21st century person and he's a 13th century person. But that's exactly what Boethius's definition, as usefully employed by Thomas, is getting at. This Christiform historical situation, this salvation history that we find ourselves in, this concrete moment, this proximate place where we work out our salvation to reach our remote end, is precisely the place where the rational nature acts, thinks, decides. I don't see anything missing from the definition. And I don't see anything missing from his elaboration either. I mean, we go into his discourse on charity. I think if we read Thomas sometimes without, okay, so here's the thing about Wojtyła, whom I love. I mean, I do. I love John Paul. But here's the thing with Wojtyła. We have to remember that he did have a fractured formation. He's got a fractured theological and philosophical formation because of the situation in Poland. So he gets what he can in an underground sort of manner in a way that's not wholly systematic. So it is completely possible that he understands these concepts in a distinctly mid-century way that doesn't necessarily do justice to all the elements of that category. Again, mid-century formation, or like maybe, I guess, 40s. I don't know. You have to. I'm bad with history. You have to give me the dates of his formation because I don't remember. But think about his time, and then think about if someone just handed him a 19th century manual and then didn't explain it. I mean, von Balthasar has all of his criticisms. I think his criticisms are wrong too. But depending on how the person presented the Thomism, I mean, in some sense, it's justified. Does that make sense? You don't have to agree with me, but does it make sense?
No. Yes,
I'm very allergic to Thomas.
I haven't thought about your argument. I think it's very interesting. It's true that when you are being educated in very concrete moment of history, your formation depends on the circumstances, right? And so you get some fragment because you don't have a systematic formation. That's true. But doesn't mean that what you are claiming there doesn't have any sense of reality.
No, I'm not saying that. I just think whatever, I think what Teo says is true, but his critique is not true. I want to say the occasion for him saying it is false, even though what he says is true. Does that make sense? So his elaboration is true, though I do have some criticisms, but the occasion, the point of departure for that elaboration, the critique of Thomas, I think is false.
All right. Now I have a thought, or at least half a thought, but I want Christopher to get into this too.
Oh, I agree. I agree with our esteemed guest on this. I don't understand when people talk about Thomas understanding historical man, what does even that mean exactly? I mean, he certainly didn't have a consciousness of history that perhaps you might say the 19th century, or at least the accuracy in historical knowledge that we later have. But he certainly didn't understand man as a historical creature. And he did certainly understand contingency, understood time. Just been reading today about his on the divine names, and how even our predication of God is actually conditioned by our own understanding of time. That so that we, there's the mode of signification he talks about, which is conditioned by the very fact that we actually live in time. So yeah, I agree. I think a lot of those criticisms really miss the point.
May I jump in some topic that is ahead of us, but it is there and maybe related, maybe not. I may be wrong.
I do need to come back to this though, Mario. So go ahead, jump in, but I'm going to haul you back.
No. You can ask now. I can ask. I can wait. Okay.
All right. The late great Ralph McInerney has a character in one of his novels, a Dominican, who, when he's in civilian attire, which ought to be infrequent, has a pair of cufflinks on which the term veritas occurs. Now, compare and contrast, teachers do that. St. Augustine, one of the most famous portraits of him, is holding out a heart. Holding out a heart. He's not saying veritas, he's holding out a heart. And then we have Newman. And what's Newman's motto? Cor ad cor loquitur. Now, my own view is that just as the truth is one, the Catholic tradition is one, but it's oftentimes difficult to show that the truth is one. It's oftentimes very difficult to show that there's a unity of the virtues. And perhaps we might reflect for a moment or two on the iconography of Augustine holding out a heart and the motto of Newman, cor ad cor loquitur, with classical metaphysics.
Okay, let's use another image, Jim. So you've given us Newman, you've given us Augustine. Let's remember a very common portrayal of St. Thomas before the crucifix, on his knees, with pen and book in hand. There is no separation between heart and mind in the integrated soul. I think it's kind of a false dichotomy that we sort of depend on these tropes. And I'm not going to lie, I get annoyed with the Augustinians because they do really seem to underscore this heartfelt, bombastic Augustine who's just passionate for God and knows no bounds. And, I think that's one kind of person and one kind of temperament. But I even remember this as a child, actually, because I went all through Catholic school, and it always annoyed me because every saint's not like that. What about saints that are just happy in their Catholicism for the long haul and try to make incremental progress towards God and are no less passionate, like a Saint Therese, like a Saint Thomas? There is no word that Thomas wrote that was not first offered to the Sacred Heart before writing. And so the heart that Augustine holds out is the very heart that is written in words in the text of Thomas. There's no distinction. I mean, people like to think of dogmatics as like sort of the boogeyman, or metaphysics as sort of the boogeyman. But I can't imagine what is more heartfelt or more passionate than the truth, since the truth is one. I mean, this is the basic convertibility of the transcendentals, right? So that truth is found in the Sacred Heart. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I'll just add one last point to this. If we don't look back and don't look ahead, but we just look to California, here in California, we've already identified the happiest place on earth, and it's an amusement park. When you go into Disneyland, you are welcome to the happiest place on earth, literally. So here we have the mega trivialization of the great streams of Catholic thought which you would have us unite. Now, on to you, Mario.
When you were saying, and I think I agree to some extent, we need to go back to metaphysics in order to rebuild the culture. But metaphysics is a highly intellectual endeavor. It's not for everyone. Now, of course, you can begin by raising questions and all that. Now, when you compare this to evangelization, as it is somehow proposed today, it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that the pastoral approach being proposed by many people, Pope himself, is not from metaphysics, is from affection, is from care, is from loving the vulnerable, is from those who are suffering. So we begin with our heart. We don't ask them how well they are doing in using contraception. No, we don't ask moral questions. We love them. Then the elaboration of what we believe will come later, if it does. So to what extent then that pastoral approach can be reconciled with what you are saying about metaphysics?
It cannot be. It cannot be. These are two different approaches. I do not care for our contemporary approach to evangelization because I don't believe that there's ever a then. We love the sinner, including ourselves in that. And there's never an elevation of that love. It seems to me. There's never a challenge to that love. Now, I have done a lot of work with a lot of religious communities, a lot of sisters, mostly of women's religious communities. They are wonderful women who do wonderful work. They are very much grounded in precisely the kind of evangelization that you speak of, Mario. And these people are loved, and they know that they're loved. Do they ever turn towards God? Do they ever pray? Is their life ever transformed? Does a prostitute stop being a prostitute? Does a drug dealer stop being a drug dealer? Does the couple shacking up ever stop shacking up? Are the children baptized? No. I personally feel that this is a failed approach of the past few decades of the church. I know that's harsh, but I can only speak to my own experience. My own experience is that we need to offer something more than love. We do need to offer love, but we also need to offer truth. And in the history of the church, the long 2,000-year history of the church, we have managed to simultaneously love people, serve people, bind their wounds, and convict them in the truth as well. And so I think that this again, it's a false dichotomy between what's pastoral and what is dogmatic. There is nothing pastoral about leaving people in their sin and leaving them ignorant to the love of God for them and their own dignity and the magnanimity of the human spirit that can raise us all out of degradation to be united with God again as our eternal end. So, yeah. So I would say that it's not reconcilable with the approach that I would advocate. Though I understand the good intentions.
What will we say as we accompany people? What will we say as we accompany them? Christopher.
What would we say with the accompaniment?
No, I was making that as an aside. You go ahead.
I find those observations on the criticism of the current approach very interesting, and I tend to agree. I know myself as I'm a convert. If it hadn't been for somebody actually introducing metaphysics to me, I never would have become a Catholic. I don't know what I would have ended up being. I was a Protestant, but I don't. This either or approach, we either love or we speak the truth. I think is a false dichotomy, and I don't understand. At the same time, I mean, we have to. It basically seems to be a matter of how do we actually what's first in any encounter with the human being, and I think that what the judgment of what's first has to be made by prudence. For me, it was better that I had a teacher in high school who introduced St. Thomas to me and didn't give me a whole lot of love than if I had had somebody who was heartfelt towards me. If it were somebody else, it would be a different approach. As a teacher, I had experience with high school students where one of my high school students who had really no religion ended up becoming Catholic, partly through my influence, but I didn't do the heartfelt thing either. I was a teacher. And so I think that we can mix stuff, we can mix things up, and we mix things up when we act out of prudence. We view things from prudence, and we test each situation to see how we ought to proceed. Anyway, that's just. I
agree with that. Let me say this too, though, to Mario's question. So, because I still think there's a good question here. I might not agree with the present approach, but the good question here that I don't think I've answered well is. Okay, there has to be something other than metaphysics. And there is, because remember, metaphysics is philosophy and not theology. So to some extent, I mean, metaphysics is the preparatio for the evangelization, right? It's not the thing itself. I just tend to think that people today need to be convicted of reality before they'll ever be convicted of the truth of the church. But I think the church has another angle that it never relies on, and that's the liturgy. So let me add that other piece. For those who are not intellectuals, and lots of people aren't, nor do you need to be. Again, Thomas's poor widow, right? So for those who are not intellectuals, I think this is precisely why we have the liturgy, although intellectuals need it as well. This is why we have the liturgy, because the liturgy is concrete, sacramental, objective, and realistic. And I think, I mean, if you think about what St. Paul says about Christian worship being a rational worship, The liturgy is a rational worship. Now people get all sort of, what do you mean it's a rational worship? That sounds like we're rationalists, but obviously not, right? It's a worship of God who's the really real. It's the worship of truth itself, who makes himself real in Holy Communion. So I think the liturgy is sort of the other piece that's missing in this conversation, because we went sort of in our philosophical domain first. But I think we begin our evangelization, honestly, preeminently with liturgy. So I don't think that the contemporary person is very different than the ancient person or the medieval person, or the modern person or the late modern person. I do recognize the uniquely post-Christian situation we find ourselves in, and that is a new reality for the church. And so I do completely understand why that would precipitate new evangelical movements. That makes perfect sense to me. However, the nature of the human person is not radically different. In every age, we have all been sinners. In every age, we have all degraded ourselves by sin. And in every age, the church has offered truth and liturgy, and we have been converted, and we have been made saints in every age. This age can be converted and made into saints the same way that saints have always been made. That doesn't mean, again, that we don't use the language of our time or recognize our post-Christian circumstance. But I don't like this sort of emphasis that we see, again, in a lot of mid-century theology about the new man, the new person, the new woman. We're so completely different. Well, guess what? I mean, like, we're not completely different. You know, we're still human beings in our fallen nature who need to be baptized.
The new mass. Right. But that you touch a very interesting point, because I look myself, I'm also a child of the 80s. And when you mentioned the liturgy and those who were not believers then, how we be aware of the transcendent and God and everything else. When you went to a mass where people were preaching about the new man, I believe in man, redeemer of the world, and all that. So there was a sense of the protagonism of this earth, and everything was claimed, as sure is true, coming from Vatican II. And so that formed the conscience of many people, not toward classical metaphysics, rather than a view of reality, politics, ethics, which is not in accord, I believe, with the tradition of the church.
This is true.
I'm touching something very sensitive, but I think this is what happened, it's factual.
I think that's true.
Well, as a child of the 50s.
Wow, really?
I'd like to maybe add a little fuel to the fire of our discussion. Karl Barth suggested that preachers should have a Bible in one hand and the day's paper in the other hand. Was he onto something, or was he leading us astray?
Well, certainly, although I think today you maybe should have the Summa in one hand and the internet in the other.
How about a laptop?
This is an update.
A little bit of an update, but yes. No, I think he's correct. I mean, I think people who love the intellectual life, I mean, everybody has their fatal flaw, right? I mean, I think people who love the intellectual life, we do have the fatal flaw of staying in our ivory tower. I'd be the first person to say that I really enjoy reading St. Thomas and just staying within the 13th century, and I'm completely happy. But that's not helpful. That's not evangelical. That's not our call. Unless you're, I'm a fundamental and a dogmatic theologian. I'm not a historical theologian. So that's not my personal call. It's not part of my vocation to just stay in the 13th century. So I think Bart's right on this. Yeah, I think you have to have an eye to the news, to what's going on, to how you can apply your faith to the times in which we actually live.
May I interject to what you're saying about the Bible and internet? And I think for some people may be helpful, particularly philosophers. Back in the 80s, probably the most important personalist philosopher in Spain, Julian Marias, wrote a piece which is called Philosophy in a Newspaper Column. And I have this article with me and laminated. And the idea was, he was following a tradition which began in the 30s by some philosophers, which was try to make any argument that you may have in philosophy and discern or analyze any event that was taking place at that point. In other words, try to somehow instill a philosophical judgment into reality, not in an abstract way, but very concrete. So philosophers in some ways were giving their views about what was happening. And so that you, through this column, which may have 100 words, and you have an art for that, and good writer, and very attractive, you were somehow absorbing those principles, classical principles, whatever principles, that otherwise you may not be in contact with. And so this tradition is perhaps was not practiced because people don't have this, philosophers don't have this ability to convey in a very simple language what is very complex, perhaps theoretically. And so, and I think it's very helpful.
I love that. I've never heard of this person or this column, but that is wonderful. I absolutely love that idea. I think the problem today is with the fracture of media. Like, because of our new media, where would you write that even a large section of people would read? I guess it would have to be a blog post, but then blogs are self-selecting. You're already interested in the thing that the person's writing about. So it's very difficult to have nobody really reads the newspaper. So it's difficult to find a place where most people will actually read.
I do believe that you can, because what happened, I have been writing a column of 30 years. So, and I'm going to publish now a book out of my column. I rewrote some of them, but the idea is not just to publish in a newspaper, which it is. But then today, the newspaper is not just a hard copy. A newspaper is in the internet. So people have access without buying the copy. So there are many means, and yet you have a bunch of people who look at your article and you can discuss, and so you can expand slowly. But I think that's a means. It's not the only one, but I think it's the way by which you can bring down into the agora, the contemporary agora, what otherwise people wouldn't even know that. There is one criticism, and I receive very hard criticism. To me, it's unfair, but I'm getting older enough to handle with that, is that if you do that, you are not a philosopher, because you are making trivial an argument which in itself is difficult. So that people want to keep the argument in a very obscure jargon. So in that sense, you are diminished, you are talking down, because you only talk to regular people about things that should be preserved to the enlightened elite or something like that.
Well, if we're almost at the end, we can always be post-end. We can go a little bit over. Christopher, do you have a last thought for us?
Well, that I disagree with those people who think philosophers shouldn't write for newspapers. St. Thomas preached to the people, and I'm thinking this is more theology, but he also wrote a book called Compendium Theologiae, Compendium Theology, a kind of, it never was finished like the Summa, but it was a simplification of the Summa for lay folk, people who don't have the time to do this. So does it have all the richness of the Summa? Well, no, it doesn't, but yet it's still, if we don't have something like that, then philosophy is going to simply remain the domain of a very, very few. And it becomes very difficult to understand, therefore, how truth can be considered something, what we call it, can't be considered the common good. If it can only be communicated. We don't understand that people can actually participate in the truth at various different levels. Not everyone's going to have the precision of a philosopher or a theologian, but nevertheless, they still can have some aspect of it. It's like St. John Chrysostom said, the faith has made even simple people wise. That's a paraphrase. But I think that's, so I would disagree with those critics of yours.
Last thought. In Newman's an essay toward a grammar of assent, he reaches his highest philosophical level, and at the very beginning of it, he has a short quote from St. Ambrose, and what Ambrose says is, it's not in dialectic that God chose to save his people. So we can have a combination of many themes, and it can be creative rather than splintering. And certainly what unites us is the gospel, and we always end with the gospel of the day. And this is from Luke, and it's very domestic. After Jesus left the synagogue, he entered the house of Simon. Simon's mother-in-law was afflicted with a severe fever, and they interceded with him about her. He stood over her, rebuked the fever, and it left her. She got up immediately and waited on them. At sunset, all who had people sick with various diseases brought them to him. He laid his hands on each of them and cured them. And demons also came out from many, shouting, "You are the Son of God." But he rebuked them and did not allow them to speak, because they knew that he was the Christ. At daybreak, Jesus left and went to a deserted place. The crowds went looking for him, and when they came to him, they tried to prevent him from leaving them. But he said to them, "To the other towns also I must proclaim the good news of the kingdom of God, because for this purpose I have been sent." And he was preaching in the synagogues of Judea. Come, Lord Jesus, come.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. We've had 210 shows, and this is one of my favorites.
Oh, thank you very much.
Excellent. We need to invite you again.
How about next week? I said that to a colleague, a one-time colleague of yours, James Matthew Wilson.
Oh, Wilson, we just lost him.
Yes, I said that to him, but he didn't answer back. He sent a heart when I put up on our Facebook. When I put up on our Facebook that you were joining us, he sent a heart.
Oh.
And being ever conniving, I thought, I could ask him again. All right. Godspeed.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.